Check, check, check.
Brad, do you mind if I leave my coffee here?
Absolutely not. You are more than welcome to.
When you can start streaming, I would just mute all mics with the music.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm gonna raise this camera. Can you help me just?
Yeah. Hold on one second.
Good evening, everyone. You all want to take a seat? We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, tonight we'd like to begin by rewarding the winners of the Tampa Bay Literary Society's first ever student art contest. Students were challenged to create their very own work of art using nothing but trash and other recyclable items. I think our two young artists have done an amazing job. Okay, if my two winners want to stand up. Want to come up here? We won't bite too much. Okay, our first winner from the 5 and under category is Miss Madeline Bell Sizemore for her beautiful sculpture titled The Tree with Bird. Okay, our second, actually. There you go, Madeline. Congratulations. Our second winner tonight from the 6 to 10-year-old category is Miss Amelia Rose Sizemore for her creative sculpture titled Recycled Schoolgirl. Here you go, Amelia. Amelia. Beautiful. Congratulations, you two, and keep up the amazing work. You guys can sit down.
Welcome. This evening, we will celebrate the spirit of what is known as mystical poetry. We know that this is a comparatively unfamiliar genre to most of us here, but a genre that is gaining popularity quickly across the world. Our aim this evening is to hear a few mystical poems and discuss some important aspects of this emerging type of poetry. We have with us here Partho, himself a poet who writes in the mystical tradition, introducing us to the mystical poetry of Pariksith Singh. A writer, poet, and teacher, Partho joins us from the Literary Forum, a global platform whose focus is to celebrate the beauty of literature and the arts and to awaken the creative spirit. While known to many of us here as Dr. Singh, he is first and foremost a poet and a philosopher. Whether healing a patient, running his business, or writing his poetry, Pariksith is always looking for the perfect expression of the spirit in matter. Accompanying Partho and Dr. Singh is Gaurav Mathur, a poet, philosopher, and cardiologist who loves to explore the core of every issue, the heart of the matter. We will begin the poetry session with a reading of selected poems from Pariksith Singh, rendered into creative movement and dance by Dr. Maria Scunziano-Singh. Ever evolving, Dr. Maria, a naturopathic medical doctor, author, public speaker, and founder of this amazing Welcome Om Center, aspires to guide others on their journey to becoming healthier and happier beings. Using holistic approaches, Maria is committed to working in harmony with the mind, body, and spirit to better not just herself, but all she meets along the way. The discussion on poetry will begin after the dance performances. We ask that you all participate actively in this evening's discussion. Please feel free to ask questions and to share your thoughts and feelings as the discussion proceeds. Keeping in mind the nature of our program this evening, we request now that you double check your cell phones, ensure that they are switched off or in silent mode, Any noise or flashes will distract from this event. We now welcome with you to explore with us the spirit of mystical poetry.
Readings from mystical poetry. A few poems written by Pariksith Singh. The history of mankind. The history of mankind can be summarized in a few biographies. There are some who have carried the weight of earth quietly. Poetry is beautiful, but the true poetry is the Tao. The hush of stars in the night sky and crickets ringing in great pulses of light, the quiet absorption when the face of the flower becomes your face, the swift stillness of the squirrel from its undulation across grass fields, and the sudden flights of the cardinal painting red streaks in space as thou swallows up all the hardness and seeking. Its wholeness softens and envelops in a sphere flowing beyond horizons. An ocean awareness where all is moving, yet all is still and within, perfect and eternally complete. The true movement out of form is into formlessness, out of the full into the empty, moving into the pure void, with stillness as your mode, with the depths of the ocean in your sky eyes, and the openness of the sky in your frame. You gaze at the petals falling with each gust of wind from the crepe myrtle, and you find them falling within. Upon autumn leaves. Step lightly by upon the autumn leaves. When the wind curls back in golden sun and breath slows to stand still. Step lightly without pressure, leaving the moist ground untouched, the floor unsoiled, as if you were wings floating through space without a trace. In the end, there is none that moves, only the wind curls back on itself, the leaves unstirred, and the mud without footprints, and the illusion of reminiscences too fails without someone to reminisce. My love for you. My love for you was only a journey towards myself. As you grew closer in vision and reality, in sleep and dream, I fell off as a face upon a longing. Only a wordless seeking remained, as a newborn groping for womb again, wrapped tight in sanitized linen, aspires to be whole, seeking to reunite the fractured infinite inside a globe of light and golden amnion. And in the moments I was born, I felt your face blurred with senses, numbed with mind, and I could see, even as blind. And now that ageless time returns at 50, each instant a turning, each perception an embrace, and I lose the self that loved and sought, the self of memories of others and my own, the self of ancestors and those unborn. One by one, the cells dissolve, leaving a growing reflection inside, as in the depths of a pool, a face is glimpsed, a little window in the heart of things that opens to sky, encompassing the universe, and the void is complete, the zero masquerading as one. Carry the ocean. Carry the ocean with you wherever you go. Let the rays pour out from your gaze as light from skies. Bear the universe in your single person, growing seamless without horizon. As unknown spaces move, vaster than the one you inhabit, skies open to skies in your wondrous eyes. To be free in oneness, each still luminous with mystery. Wrap yourself with wonder and let the veil of transparency show through. Our questions are a response to glaring replies. The solitary moon in still night, the rose blooming, the bees, the butterflies are answers. to queries we have not asked yet, but will surely arise. So let's go. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Partho. I represent the Literary Forum here, and this evening, as you heard from Sky, we are going to focus on mystical poetry. So what you saw here and what you heard were samples of some mystical poems written by Pariksith Singh. And Pariksith Singh, better known perhaps to you as Dr. Singh, is one of the very few mystical poets writing in the English language today, the world over, and I'm not exaggerating. And it's precious poetry, and as you heard earlier, this is it's an old genre, it's not new. Mystical poetry in English begins from biblical times and continues to this day. And it's a genre becoming increasingly more and more popular and more important in today's world. So I hope today, this evening, we can discuss some of the important aspects of this kind of poetry. May I invite Dr. Pariksith Singh, the poet, philosopher, healer, and friend. It's his poems that you just heard. And I have with us today another person who's been writing mystical poetry for quite some years. I've known him since he was in college in India, and he started writing mystical poetry both in the English and in the Hindi language. And he just happens to be a cardiologist with Access Care here in Spring Hill, Dr. Gaurav Mathur. May I please invite him to the stage today? So, the first question we always have to start with is, what is mystical poetry? Because if you were to Google this term, you'll find as many definitions of mystical poetry perhaps as there are poets writing mystical poetry. So what is mystical poetry? For most people, especially in the Western world, in the Christian tradition, mystical poetry is poetry related to God and to God experience. God experience is, again, something that not all of us look upon with exactly the same understanding. Can one experience God as long as one is human? Can the human mind and the human heart ever come to an experience of God? Because God is by definition the infinite, and our minds and hearts are finite. So can the finite ever experience the infinite? This is the subject matter of most mystical poetry. And in the East, the part where I come from in India, mystical poetry is poetry essentially of inner experience of inner worlds that we cannot grasp with the senses, not worlds that we can perceive or touch and feel, and yet worlds that are perhaps more real than the world that we touch and see and feel. So every poet who writes in the mystical tradition has inner experiences, and his or her struggle is always to articulate in words what he or she has experienced inwardly, and that is always a challenge because it's not easy to do that. Most of the languages that I know of do not lend themselves too easily to contain the mystical experience. So poetry, therefore, is, I think, a natural choice of the mystical mind or the mystical heart to express itself. And the mystic express himself or herself, she or he must. It's almost like a river in spate overflowing its boundaries. It cannot contain itself. So that is the origin and the source of most mystical poetry. Before I start actually talking to Pariksith and to Gaurav today about mystical poetry, I just want to read a few lines, some lines from his poems, just to give an idea a bit more of mystical poetry. This is from a book Pariksith published in India last year. It's called There Was a Girl I Loved Once. I'll just read out the poems and then you figure it out. Her smile was sky. Her touch was earth. And everywhere I turned with eyes of blood, I saw her face. Not your ordinary romantic poem, huh? I saw in her eyes a night full of stars and the forehead of moon. And I longed to hold the limbs of space as I heard in her laughter a giggle of waves. And I saw in each face of the innumerable men that toiled lonely in quarries of sun the hidden assurance of a mother's gaze. And I felt the tears of countless children that welled in my throat, and I held them as my own. In the widening stillness, I cried alone in close embrace. And I see her smile even now, with waves of gold and mustard fields and huts of neem. Neem is what's the English word for neem? It's an Indian herb.
Tree. We have it somewhere.
We have it here. Waves of gold and mustard fields and huts of neem, and I feel her presence in the sparkling grain as my heart is replaced by a silent throb. So this is part. One more I want to read before I start the discussion is from Radha's Geet. Radha's Geet is, it means the songs of Radha. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the word Radha. Those of you who, Radha, Krishna, if you've heard of Krishna, it's this Indian god, but Radha is more symbolic than real, and Krishna too is divinity, a godhead, but also a very powerful, very evocative symbol in Indian mystical thought. So Radha is the human soul that always cries for a longing with the divine. So when you listen to this, Radha's Geet, you have to think of that, the human soul eternally yearning for union with the divine. Carved from a lone stem in the woods, I am the empty flute on your lips. My stillness plays your tune's allure. With each note I grow more and more hollow, void of all I've loved and been. And now this wood is you, kissed and spoken for, the breathless mate of your smile. And this is my bliss, to be still in your stillness, a plaything in your play, song of a hollow self, stream of nectar and honey flowing through my limbs, carved from a lone stem in the woods. So, Pariksith, he's been writing poems, especially in this vein, since I first knew him way back in college in India. And I've seen over the years his spirit and the poetry grow together. As always, the poetry that one writes, that one sings, is an expression, a reflection, an articulation of how one grows within and what one experiences within. So Pariksith, I would like you to start this evening telling us a bit about how it all began. How did this kind of poetry come to you, or how did you come to this kind of poetry?
Oh, it's a long story, but it simply began, actually you started the process. 18 years ago when we met, he handed me T.S. Eliot, 4 quartets. Go read this. T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets are probably his highest achievement, where his maturity as a poet and a Christian came together. And he brought his perception into the mystical Christian tradition, beautifully put together. Of course, he was a modernist, so he broke all the rules of traditional poetry, but in a beautiful way. And it took me 6 months to understand the first line. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. And I had no idea what he was talking about. How could time past be present in time future? So it took me a while, kept reading, and that's how some 6 months later an insight came about the nature of time as we see it, and how Eliot saw it differently. So insights from great writers, thinkers, and then a lot of attempt to grow oneself while in medical school, which was very difficult, as Gaurav can attest, and then residency, which was very tough, and then coming to Spring Hill and trying to start a practice and a family and all the challenges, and still trying to grow in that midst. So that has been the challenge through even the medical career. How can we, despite all the processes, the technology, the demands of rules, can we still keep the heart alive? That has been the attempt. So that's how really I think sometimes we carry something and that comes out, and it's so precious that we want to just hold it despite all the contradictions of life that we live, and something cherishable comes there, and so we try to capture that.
It's always interesting to know how a poet comes to his poetry. I'll just read a few lines from a poem written by Gaurav. Thought and its futility are seen. Desire and its pointlessness are seen. Fear and its subsidence are seen. The unwavering flame of attention engulfs all that is. Mind is still, void of content. Ego sinks back in quiet repose to its source. All is as is, naturally at ease. And the self is all there is, a presence within and all around. The benevolent monarch, calm and eternal, patient and gentle, soft and subtle, all-pervading yet untouched, creator, mover, and destroyer, of worlds upon worlds, which are all but itself, playing with itself. The ras of Krishna, ras means the play, the divine play of Krishna, and Shiva's Tandav, the dance of Shiva. And the ras of Krishna and Shiva's Tandav are one cosmic dance of the moving self. A very mystical strain of thought there. So Gaurav, how did you come to this kind of poetry?
So, I think it started for me in medical school as well, with Pariksith, a few years senior to me, introducing me to Partho, and between the two of them, I sort of started on my journey, not really so much about God, but more about self-discovery, trying to figure out who I am, what all this is, and what all this is about. And I didn't write much, but I used to write when I couldn't resist it, when the urge would get so strong to put something that was so strong within you that you have to express it, sort of like the river overflowing its banks. So I try to resist writing poetry, and sometimes that's not good for the development of the skill of writing poetry. But I think it allows the crystallization of that which needs to be expressed most strongly. So I've written poetry along the way, as and when it came to me, but not as a sort of systematic process. The same would also hold true for this whole question of self-inquiry, this whole who am I and what is my place and why are we all here and why is all this around us. There are days when these are important burning questions for us, and there are days when life overtakes us and too many other things to do and no time for such woolly-headed thoughts. But that also is a process, and that process also takes place in time past and time present, and hopefully time future as well.
And all present in time present.
So it's an ongoing process.
So one more glimpse of mystical writing, and after that I would also like all of you to be involved in our discussion. You know, if you have examples or if you yourself have ever attempted this kind of poetry, I would love it if you can share it with us, or if you know of some other poem by any other poet, we can do that. Right? So I just want to read a poem which is very interesting for me, at least, because I'm sure many of you are part of Welcome Home here, and you're part of the yogic movement that is happening in the United States even as we speak. This is a poem that talks about an extremely interesting, exciting, complex, and advanced yogic experience. Those of us who are familiar in any way with yoga and yogic experience will immediately understand this, will immediately recognize this to be an experience of your life force arising from your lower, as we call it, chakras, and moving upward in what is called the ascension towards liberation. So just hear this poem. Of course, as all mystical poetry, it's richly symbolic. Symbolism is an intricate part of all mystical poetry anywhere in the world. Returning to my home, which I never left, drawing up my breath above my crown into a still point, and holding it in one indrawn state where no sound arises, and stillness the only speech. I think of you without memory. Not a single thought stirs. nor feeling disturbs remembrance, and my love becomes limitless and mute. Thus, having no desire to communicate, this immolation of self with the quiet flame, I have finally reached the end of my self-inflicted journey, one I never traveled nor began. What was that?
Oh my gosh, I forgot why I wrote it. So a lot of these, actually, it's really a point where everything became very quiet, mind became very quiet. And I think if I remember right, it was autumn, so nice color of leaves outside. So you have moments where everything falls off from you, and you just feel a state of joy and tenderness towards the whole world. And I think that's how it, that just feeling came through in these words.
So when you heard this poem, what did you feel? Because it's not talking about, the sun is rising and the wind is blowing. Because this is an order of, all mystical poetry relates an order of experience which is somewhat outside of our ordinary human experience. So, what did you feel when you heard that poem? Anyone at all? Yes.
I felt the connection to each poem had a symbol of foundation.
Right.
And in your first poem that you read about your first love, was that as a person or as the world or Mother Earth?
Interesting question. Before he answers, because my job is to bring the focus always on mystical poetry, the tradition of mystical poetry. In mystical poetry, that's the most interesting thing. It's at once personal and impersonal. That's the magic of symbolism. And one of the foundational experiences of all mysticism is the experience of unity, the unitive experience, where myself as a human being and myself as earth or the terrestrial body is somewhat blurred, if not completely eliminated. One feels oneself to be the universal. And when you grasp that idea, then the poems become even richer in the reading. But having said that about mystical tradition, could you please respond to her question?
So here you're talking about there was a girl I loved once. So it's an old tradition that I grew up with. The Indian tradition is in some ways matriarchal, and actually in Christianity we see that strains of it. The Virgin Mary is exalted because she brought Christ to the physical form. So the mystical tradition is the Divine Mother. The universe is the Divine Mother, nurturing you, taking care of you. Obviously that's not a human mother, but the human mother that you have represents the Divine Mother, the universe. Same concept of the womb we have, where we come from, where there was wholeness, and now we are coming into this world where everything is kind of come into a sensory disunity. It's those parallels. What happened was I was listening to a Hindi song. It was a romantic song from a beautiful movie, and suddenly, and I had been looking for a symbol, how do I present this feeling of being one with everything we touch. Technically, we are one with everything, at least if quantum physics is to be believed or is understood. So this symbol just came. There was a girl I loved once. And so this was, I think, the first poem I wrote, and it was so intense. I cried. Even as I wrote, I was crying. And the girl is not a person, but there's no other way to describe that sense of loving everything without kind of focusing that. So that person, the girl whom you loved once, becomes that focus for all your feelings that you have. So in that sense, it was not a person, but yet that is the symbol that represented the feeling. Is that? I don't think it's working. Is it? That's okay. I think you can hear me now. So this actually, as the poem was coming, it came through layers, where the goal was not to tell the reader who this girl is. The goal is for the reader to go through the poem and figure out, because usually it seems like a romantic thing. There's a girl he loved once. Oh my God, it's romantic poetry. But when you start describing this person who is an imperson or omniperson, and suddenly your lines get blurred. So that girl who has stars, you see, when you see the stars, you see her eyes. Or when you see the moon, you see her forehead. Suddenly, the reader, I think, dwells into it and kind of maybe goes through that experience, which I feel all of us have, each of us, either in deep sleep or moments of intense feeling or romanticism, when we are feeling romantic or loving maybe towards our children or something really beautiful, that something different happens to us, something divine is always there, or someone whom you love completely. Even religious fervor, that if it's not divisive, it can take you to that unitary feeling. So this attempt of that poem was to start on a personal note and then take away those limits of person, and then let the reader feel through and find that it was really never about a person. I don't know if that answered your question. And then the second mystery to that is, why was the girl only loved once? So that gets unraveled later, hopefully in a nice poetic way.
So I'm going to read out, hello, am I on speaker? Yeah, I am, okay. So I don't need this, do I?
No.
So let's see how many of you can recognize these lines from one of the best-known mystical poets of the English tradition. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Where do you think that's from? Any guess? One of the... Can you read it again? Yes, sure. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. In an hour, hour. I think in America you say hour, right?
Hour.
Yeah. In English,
eternity in an hour.
In English it's hours. So I'm pronouncing it both ways. That's William Blake, perhaps one of the best-known mystical poets of in English literature. And I just wanted to read that line out while Pariksith was talking about how the poem came to him. And this is another one of my favorites in mystical poetry. I saw eternity the other night, like a great ring of pure and endless light, all calm as it was bright. All around beneath it, time in hours, days, years, driven by the spheres, like a vast shadow moved, in which the world and all her train were hurled. Recognize the poet here? Henry Vaughan, another very well-known English poet in the mystical tradition. So, would you please read out some lines from your poems which you want them to hear this?
So, actually, it segues nicely into this. Here I am trying to write a poem. I sit silent in my chair. I sit silent in my chair, poised with pen and paper, all eyes and ears, waiting to catch a glimmer or the faintest whisper of the eternal. Nothing. And all around me, chirping birds, flowing water, rustling leaves, drizzling rain, distract and divert me, dissuade and derail me, and I achieve, or so it seems, nothing. Life, the universe, everything, a grand conspiracy, overrules my negation, overwhelms my senses. I am drowned in a deluge of being. My peace and quiet, my inner solitude, my silent core, all are hushed by the roaring tumult of life, the universe, everything. Even the solitary flame within, quenched by the fiery glow of 1,000 splendid suns, blazing forth forever. Life, the universe, everything, have consumed me completely. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. There is no outer world. There is no me inside. Only sitting and flowing, silence and chirping, paper and leaves, drizzling and blazing, nothing and everything. Life, the universe, and I are one. Thank you.
So at this point, I would like to invite you into the discussion. Please feel part of it. I don't want you to just be spectators. Yes, please.
That last one had a flavor of like haiku, Buddhism, the existential angst, the dichotomy of the opposites. It resonated.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, there is like a similarity I saw between the two poems that were last read. It goes, the north side of my own beliefs is that God is just creation in itself. So
Yeah.
thus all that is created has a divine quality to it. So kind of figuring that out, it seems like that was the recurrent theme between those two sort of
Right.
entries. But I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
That, people are touching base on simultaneously this particular art form to express themselves.
Yes, it's interesting, yeah. Do any of you write this kind? I know there are many poetesses here that I personally have heard your poems, but
So I just wanted to add to that.
yeah, sure.
Creativity is one of the attributes. When we say God, we usually, unfortunately, our mental training, our education system is messed up, so we see somebody sitting there and like a headmaster, but that's a anthropomorphic way of looking at God. But creativity, which is the universe, is absolutely beautifully creative each moment. When we touch creativity, we are touching that aspect of that infinite creativity that we see, which we give the name of God. It's something far absolutely mysterious. That's how our mind catches it. So, yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Sorry.
I was going to add
arts anymore or find it essential. And so we lose that aspect of the complexity of who we are and how we ponder, and the entirety of our physics and how we process all of what we are and continue to become. So all of these kinds of writings are so crucial, I think, for us to share as human beings, and thank you.
Yeah. It's a profound observation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Actually,
Right, yeah.
when Aristotle came, Greek philosophy moved to a very objective way of looking at things. Before that, you had Pythagoras, you had Heraclitus, and the other mystic poets who,
if you want,
philosophers who...
The mystical in Greek, Plotinus, I consider to be the leading mystical poet in the entire Greek tradition.
Yes. And so by the time you came to Aristotle, he was thinking of that in mental terms, and the feeling, the living of it just started disappearing. And so, of course, then Western thought came to Descartes and Newton, where it just became a very externalized way of seeing things. So the inner sense, the feeling was started disappearing. The unity started disappearing.
And I think you, as doctors, understanding the mechanics of existence, can better, in some ways, appreciate that beyondness, let me call it that, the beyondness of what we are and who we are.
It's very difficult because medical education is, again, very reductionistic. It's a body, physical body, and suddenly we have to constantly leave our mind, frontal lobe, and go back and feel, because our medical education is totally external. So forget spirit or soul. It is difficult to even engage with people, to even start empathy. That is tough. So that is our own personal evolution as physicians, because we have been trained in a very intellectual way, but to forget the humanity of that person who's coming, we just forget. We're just looking at numbers. We're looking at CAT scans to remind us constantly. That's our challenge. But yeah, you're right. The mystery of the body, that itself takes you to a sense of awe. What a beautiful creation it is.
I think it's so weird how you said that unity learning dissolves over time with a more secular viewpoint of things. Because even if you look at the objective viewpoint of things, remove the spirituality entirely, essentially, the fact that we're all stardust, literally still from the same place. Even if you take away God, you take away, billions and trillions of years ago, probably just in the few past hundreds of millions of years, something created us, and it's all from the same source, and even from that can erupt a unity or a oneness. So I think it's kind of weird that happened, that it was so dissolved, because I don't think that even if you discard those natural theories of philosophy and religion, you can still gain a unity from that objective standpoint as a derivative, I think, so.
You can, if your perspective, if you look at it divisively, then you see a world divided, right? Binary world, us and them, objective, subjective. That's a divisive way. Whereas when you start connecting, empathizing, compassion, feeling with, then you start touching that, which we have to relearn it. I have to relearn it constantly. It's a challenge. I think all of us as a society have to constantly relearn it without taking sides. We are you look at discourses today, we take sides immediately without listening, without looking. We are so busy in our own, I am right. So that's divisive. But a different position is when you start listening to the other and see, is there any truth in it? What is what is there, at least giving the person the respect of being able to speak. So every knowledge, this piece of knowledge has come from that. It'll take you there, but it's how you look at it. I think that's, and it's our training. It's how when we grew up as children, we are forced to read because we're going to become successful. If we do this, we become successful. Immediately you have divided. Because my becoming successful means what? I'm number one, everybody else is behind me. We have created division. Ambition has been pushed. Competition has been pushed. The moment you have competition, you have division. So unfortunately, that's how our education system as children don't carry that. If you see children playing, they're not carrying that. We bring it to them because of the way we have acculturated them. And that's unfortunate. But it's the mind's way of perceiving. Right now, if you read quantum physics, this is all unitary. But it's how we look at it. And that's the challenge.
You think I need a microphone? You are physicians. Partho, you're a teacher, educator, builder. You do everything. I am witness to your schedules. And from sunup to sundown, I know that so much gets involved and in front of things. For you all to take the time to pause, share your talent, and actually find the time to write or to inspire with dance. I'm bringing Dr. Maria into this. And take the time to do these things because we know you didn't have to, and to create because you are inspired. I just want to thank you, and for all of us, keep doing it and keep sharing, because I sit here and feel chills up and down my spine through this whole experience. And I know that what you shared, Doctor, about discovery, your self-discovery, that's how you started. Not, I'm going to write a book and be famous, and and none of you started out that way. You found that passion inside, and you all have written works of art. And thank you for sharing it, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for saying that.
I had a question. Some of the mystical experiences that people can experience, they can be very intense, like tantric meditation. They can induce hallucinations. Some Buddhist meditations, they can, control their body temperature. Wild, insane experiences. So writing that in a poetic, outlet, like you're doing, do you find that having medical knowledge of the body and its workings allows you to take some of those sensory experiences and express them in a more receivable way to people that, might not be able to fathom how intense some of those things can be? Did your, medical training help you kind of convey some of those spiritual processes that you might have experienced over time?
So it gives you the vocabulary, it gives you knowledge of, say, the physiology, but physiology doesn't explain our feelings. There's more to us than just our physiology. But you're right, gives you some way, a different way of looking, a different way of experiencing. From my vantage as a professional, I've seen the world in a different way. Now I can be egoistic about it because I'm the center, or I can be totally humble about it because it's the patient who's the center. So using that language has helped, I think. And more every day, I'm humbled by my patients. So to use that as part of my discipline and growth, practice has helped, and the knowledge of physiology. And more our knowledge of physiology is challenging us. As you said, quantum physics challenges all our preconceptions. The way we look at the world, you cannot hold it that way if you see that. The beauty of the body, how it is, you can no longer see the world that way if you see the mystery of it. And I'm not taking sides in a debate, it's just the beauty of the body, or physiology, or anatomy, or chemistry. It's so amazing. So you have I think if you really pay attention, go deep into it, it'll give you a sense of the mystery of creation and existence. And I think that is the secret. That is the sense of mystery and not knowing that I know. Suddenly you say, I really don't know. I who think I know everything, nothing. That's when suddenly you're able to feel that awe or the sense of this vast mechanism that's happening, which is still not a mechanical thing, it's just a mysterious thing. And then I think that helped.
One of the things I like about some of your poetry, one line stood out for me. I went back to the home I never left. That really, there's a lot of contrasts and contradictions in the poetry, and it's metaphoric too, it's metaphorical. The sounds have contrast, warm, cold, yes, no, all those different kinds of contrasts. I think what's good about it is that I think you need to read it over a couple times, obviously, because just to think about that one line, I went back to the home I never left, and then go on to something else. It's very intriguing. It's very intriguing. Just wanted to, it makes you think about it. It makes you want to read more of it and try to, it's like a puzzle. It's almost like a puzzle you have to solve, I think, for me anyway.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on the impact of your native culture and how has that have a bearing on your writing?
Yeah, I think tremendous impact. Of course, the symbolism of the mother principle had a lot. And it's interesting, we were brought in two traditions at the same time. So we had the Indian tradition, a different way of looking at the world, which Indians are forgetting. And then we were brought up, we studied in a Jesuit school. So great teachers, very giving, beautiful. We were blessed with great priests, unlike all the information we hear nowadays, who gave and taught. So that kind of gave two contrasting things, yet fortunately we saw the same symbols in both, although people may not have realized it, at least I saw the same symbols in both. So I was very interested in Christianity for a while, so I read a lot. And then of course Buddhism I was very interested in, so I read that, trying to see the truth in each, trying to give up preconceptions, and to see how the great ones have seen something deeper, gone through all the noise and static that we have and able to see something far more universal and at the core of things, and then try to see how is it relevant in our lives, because it's only intellectual. Eventually then suddenly something clicks, maybe that's what they meant. So yes, there are beautiful insights in that tradition, which are not limited to that tradition. It's, I think, universal. But the insights, some of the great insights I did use, for example, this one phrase constantly comes. Like there was one Upanishad which goes like this: Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kinch jagatyam jagat. All this that moves in this moving universe is a habitation of the Lord. And that's the line. And if you really go into that, it's a very powerful line. To me, it was a very powerful line. It suddenly takes off all the duality that you have. If everything that moves is Ishavasyam, is that
garment of the Lord,
is the clothing or home of the Lord. So you can never see, if you really get into just that one line, To me, it was a very revelatory line. So that's how maybe, the ideas start affecting.
Would you also like to respond to that, your culture and how it's influenced?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, to some extent, it's there in all cultures. This whole spirit and matter, the division and the unity between them. And so, there's a lot in Indian culture about that. There's a lot in Indian Sanskrit texts about that. But then there's also an Australian psychologist who has written a lot about the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, maybe sometime if you get a chance, you can Google it. And he's not a mystic, he's not a philosopher, and he's talked about this hard problem of consciousness, where he says, what is this first person experience that we have when we, say, see a rose or a glass of water? So, we have all these advanced medical technology that can tell you, well, if you see the rose and it's red, then this particular part of your brain will light up with an fMRI. And what he argues is that actually that is just correlation. So all you're doing with that is you are saying, okay, so somewhere there is consciousness, and when that consciousness gets to the brain and the neurochemicals and the neurons and all that, that's where the fMRI, the MRI scan lights up, or certain parts of your brain are activated. But what is that consciousness? This has been a very central thought of Indian philosophy and this whole idea of self-discovery, etc. But this is coming from somebody who is not at all part of the, not even a devout Christian for that matter. He's just, if I remember correctly, he's atheist. And yet he talks about the same thing in his terminology that we would call
mystical.
Mystical.
Would you have his name?
I'm forgetting it.
No, that's mysticism.
That's
forgot
mysteriousism.
Joseph Campbell, yes. Yeah.
Very wonderful at connecting
Right.
all of the traditions and beliefs that we as humans have evolved over time, and also the journey of the hero and how we journey in becoming ourselves from the time we are small until we become more wise and able to think through maybe with our prefrontal cortex, and then what that consciousness is about. And I think he did a wonderful job of connecting all of that together.
Yeah, and Campbell, when he's connected a lot of dots even in the mystical sphere through his very rich and sterling work on symbology. Which reminds me a few lines that, let me read out from, again, one of the poets who I feel stand at the head of mystical tradition in the English language, Robert Browning, profound mystical poet. God is in the star, in the stone, in the flesh, in the soul, in the clod. And through all these forms, there is growth upwards. Indeed, it is only upon this that the poet can account for many a thrill of kinship, I confess to, with the powers called nature, animate, inanimate, in parts or in whole. There's something there, man-like, that somehow meets the man in me. And similar lines again from another great mystical poet, William Wordsworth. To every natural form, rock, fruits or flower, even the loose stones that cover the highway, I gave a moral life. I saw them feel or linked them to some feeling. The great mass lay bedded in quickening soul, and all that I beheld respired with inward meaning. Beautiful line there. All that I beheld respired with inward meaning.
Well, that last reading kind of wraps up what I was going to share earlier. And I think when that gentleman was talking about the inspiration of the poetry, I think it's when we let go of our ego self and connect with our spiritual oneness self. We hear the language of everything around us, and everything speaks its own language.
Right.
And that's why the interpretations are so individualized, because it's not from us.
Right.
It's from our connecting and our oneness with what we're relating to.
So another interesting aspect of mystical poetry is not just relating the mystical experience, but also giving you insights on how a mystical experience actually happens. What is the consciousness behind it? So I'll read out a poem again from Pariksith's earlier poetry. He wrote a series of poems which he called Thou They Sing, sing as in Pariksith Singh. He's also a master punster, along with being a poet, and which is quite delightful, really. So this is obviously a takeoff on the world famous Tao Te Ching. I'm sure you're familiar with Lao Tzu's masterpiece. So this is a poem that also gives you, there are several poems he's written that gives you insights, valuable insights into the actual experience and conditions that one creates for experience. And this is something that W.B. Yeats once said about mystical poetry, that it creates an ambience for inwardness. Very important phrase. Creates an ambience for inwardness. So just listen to this poem. Withdrawing into my heart makes the world grow softer. As I act from my center, the hard edges of 10,000 things are mellowed. Sharp surfaces move in fluidity. In the vast sea of the heart, all harshness of thought and desire become gentle. I am seated within a rainbow eternally, the spectrum of original light. Colors grow in intensity until restored to sight that comes with looking for the first time. So these are again very important insights. I remember one of your poems, Deliverance Through Surrender. This is almost like after a lot of struggle within himself, because I read his other poems, he suddenly gets it. What is that he gets? The key, deliverance through surrender, order restored. My true self is now in form, whole, wholesome, pure, unchanged, or rather back to the original form, self before me, before time, unchained, or rather the simple realization that there were no chains except of my own design. So again, insights that, one more I had here. Experience without words, this is again from one of Pariksith's poems, experience without words is the door without walls. Just reflect on these lines. Experience without words. Our human tendency is to constantly articulate experience, inwardly and outwardly. Sometimes, if not outwardly, inwardly. We're always doing that. So if we can get out of that, experience without words is the door without walls that opens you to worlds you inhabit within. To fill oneself with emptiness, there is nothing one need to do. I repeat, to fill oneself with emptiness, there is nothing one need to do but remove oneself, and that too is only a concession, for there is none to remove. I'm waiting for someone of you to share a poem that you've written or you remember.
What I would like to say, it is so refreshing to have you sharing these thoughts, because sometimes all of us, as human beings, we think we know so much, and yet the five senses are very limiting, and we forget that we may be privy to many more, and that's the door opening. And that is what you express, and I thank you for that. That is absolutely magnificent. Thank you.
Are you sure there's none who wants to read a poem? You have a poem? Oh, excellent. The mic, please, yeah.
I think I'm loud enough.
The mic will still add to it.
Okay.
I think recording too.
Oh, okay. This talks to exactly what we've been saying, certainly not in your ability, but anyway, it's called Interstices. Between light and the play of light, and cattle and the wavering distance, between steer shadows and grasses and the wind and the surface on which it lands, however minuscule, is a discernible essence. We move through our days assuming all things are reducible, but like electricity of which we can only see results. In this paired space is proof. There is no cheap communion between all living things.
That's very good.
Thank you.
That's another very important insight. Your poem.
It's called Dusk Angel, a little bit different. Dusk Angel. Before sundown on a mid-August night, I searched the sky, much like Galileo might, checking the cloud cover, hoping to watch Perseids meteor shower. A cloud angel appeared, lying prone in the sky, arms extended upward, feet pointed, streamlined behind her as big, puffy wings float at her back. The descending sun created a light beam, revealing a gilt-edged ruffle on her pink dress, lavender cap on her crown. I wonder if Ptolemy saw her. Did she appear as a younger cosmic confection?
So, thank you so much. The two poems from two poets is excellent. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Any inspiration?
Can I say something?
Sure.
Just Poets always welcomes people into the group.
Just about.
Just Poets group, I don't know if you know about it, but we always welcome new members to our group. We meet the second Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock until 5, and we now meet here in the kitchen. So we'd love to have some new members. And some of the poems read today were by members of Just Poets. I'm bragging a little bit.
So before we end, a few poems that I wanted to share. This is from Pariksith. The greatest art is to disappear. In an ocean of a billion worlds, I sit still, hidden by my form, time and sense grow vast as space. Who is it that does dhyana? Dhyana is the Sanskrit word for meditation. So in English that would be, who is it that meditates? Only a few billion cells, a conglomerate of atoms, bathe in twilight and dew. The evening grows golden and blue, and butterflies retire and fold their wings. So this is, again, you'll see image and symbolism interwoven to give you an insight and what is called the mystical sense. So dropping experience, I grew free of desire. Dropping desire, I grew free of self. Dropping self, I grew free of memory. Okay, so yes, we have. I wanted to finish with one of my favorite poems, and then where's it gone? Yes, just a few lines again, and we. This is from a very famous mystical poem called The Prisoner by Emily Bronte, another very profound mystical poetess. And she writes beautifully. She gives you an insight of how this whole mystical experience happens. But first, a hush of peace, a soundless calm descends. The struggle of distress and fierce impatience ends. Mute music soothes my breast, unuttered harmony that I could never dream, till earth was lost to me. Beautiful lines. May I now call upon Maria Ji, to come and give us a few words. She's the one who you saw in silhouette behind the screen. And that itself was quite symbolic. The man's poems being read and she behind the screen, inspired by her own creative movements. Maria, applause for her, please.
Thank you. Dhanyavad. Partho ji, Pariksith ji, and Gaurav ji. It was my pleasure to be behind the curtain, no one seeing who I was. I like to hide every now and then, go into my own world. But I first want to thank everyone here who has helped put this together. We have a wonderful team of great people, Mitch and Jason, Mariah, Corey, and Elizabeth, and Sky, and Tony, and Matt. Thank you all for helping us put this together. It took some effort. It took some time off. I had to do some training here with Partho, and we wanted it to be a little bit of a surprise for this gentleman here that I'm standing next to. But we wanted to do this for the sake of, as was said, really bringing something very important to this community and to the world. This is something that we don't generally hear every day. It's a nice treat, but it really is very moving. I, myself, not a poet. I have one in the house. I don't need to be one. But his poetry is beyond words, if I could say that. And I know he's written in the past a few poems about myself, and it's hard for me to even accept that, you know, like somebody's writing about me. But those are very personal, and they were very touching and moving, and I hold them with me. But he's written so much more, and before me and after me, after we met. But I wanted to do this for him, expressing my feelings in movement. Movement to me is very important, as is stillness just as important. The two are completely complementary, and they coexist. So with movement, there's stillness. Stillness, there's movement. And I like to express myself through dance. I've done it over the years. I have not gone through formal training, but I have been dancing in different venues and so forth in my past, and I just wanted to continue to express myself. I found this an opportune time, even though it wasn't the usual crazy dancing that I do, but it was an opportunity just to move to the sound of the words with this gentleman here reading, who reads so well. And the words to my husband's poetry, which are so beautifully written. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming, and to to all of these very talented gentlemen. This man has traveled from India to come here to be with you all, and we thank you, Partho. You're brilliant in your readings, your writings. Gaurav, thank you for being here. You have a poetry side to you that I didn't know about, or I know these guys might have known about, but it's nice to hear. It's beautiful, beautiful poetry. And to you, my dear, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to dance to your beautiful words. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Have to hear the poetry and prepare your movement, or did you do this spontaneously?
Well, I do have that spontaneity. I had to look at the poems to get an idea, and then I take it from there. And I wanted to have certain things around me so that I could use little props and so forth, but we limited them just to petals and a flower, really. But I had to see the words, yes. Sometimes, no, I don't. If someone just starts, I can just move to the sound of the word, the sound of the music. I've known for that. I'm known for that. So my free dance is my creative side, and I love it. And my back used to be a lot more flexible, but I had a few kind of bumps every 4 years that came around and pulled my back. So I would have liked to have done a lot more bending of my back, but I used to be able to literally bend myself completely backwards, and I had the flexibility, but I tried, and I'm getting a little older, but yes, little practice. Okay.
All I know is that you did an outstanding job.
Thank you. When we couple things, they can work well. I think that, just the synchronicity, the blending of movement and word and or song is just it's just meant to be. I have a very special feeling in my heart for dance, and I would have probably become a professional dancer had I not veered off to medical school. But it's it's something that I love to do, and I dance in my own time privately. And usually, I go away from my kids. If they see me moving, they kind of, wonder what is she doing, It's like, but I do love to express myself through dance. It is a way of releasing my energies. I have to let them go, because sometimes what I have to deal with every day is pretty rough, and I find that through that I can unload through meditating. I can unload along with that. And dance really is my meditation for the most part, but yeah. Thank you.
One could
Thank you
feel
very
that.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for being a wonderful audience, and thank you, Gaurav, for being with me today, and thank you, sir.
Beautiful.
Sir, keep writing poems.
Thanks for coming all the way from India. It was nice meeting you.
Thank you so much.
And nice hearing you. Nice hearing you.
One, two, 1, 2.
The drums, yeah.
Now it's
I checked it. Okay, it's okay. I'm good.
Bits and pieces and scraps that, most of my art has